Well, my name is Gerald Busch, B-U-S-C-H, like the beer.
Very good. And what years did you serve Kettering City Council as a council member and as mayor?
Well, I was first elected to City Council in November of '67, and I served 14 years, and then I was elected mayor in '81 and served 2 terms as mayor until 1989, the end of '89.
Okay, outstanding. Mr. Busch, when you're not referring to your notes, can you hold your notes down a little lower? They're showing up in the picture.
Oh.
I hear them rattling.
Oh, they're rattling?
I hear most of them.
Okay. Yeah, so if you can
Yes,
just set them there.
my mic is here somewhere.
Okay,
Well, I'll try to get along without them.
all right. We can always pick them back up when you need them. No problem. What was your reason for getting on Kettering City Council in 1967?
November of '67? Yes. Well, it started out when I was helping my brother-in-law get elected as state senator. He majored in political science in college, so he wanted to put it to good use. So he decided to run for state senate. And he got elected for a 2-year term, and then he got reelected for a 4-year term. So he was on the state senate for 6 years. Well, I helped him put up signs, door to door, things like that, and I learned what it was all about. And I thought, well, gee, I know how to do this. Maybe I ought to run for council. So I did, but everybody said I didn't have a chance because I was running against somebody who had been elected twice and was vice mayor. But I kept plugging away. I went door to door a lot. I saved my vacation time at the University of Dayton, and during the month of October, I worked 4 hours and took 4 hours vacation in the afternoon, and every afternoon I went door to door. So over the course of a month, I covered 2,000 houses. And that was my strategy to win, and I did. By the time my opponent figured out I could win, it was already too late. So that's how I got involved in running for city council.
So to put some context to that story, what was your brother-in-law's name?
His brother-in-law, my brother-in-law was named David S. Holcomb, Holcomb, and he served 2 terms as state senator.
And the council member that you defeated in 1960?
That was Jack Delaney, whom everybody said I couldn't beat.
Well, history has said otherwise.
Right.
So you were a council member for many years and then decided to run for mayor. Why that decision? I
was 14 years on council, 3.5 terms. Well, what brought my decision, Chuck Horn had been mayor and he got elected to the state senate, and John Griffith took over as vice mayor for 1 year. But John's health was failing, and he told us it was, and that he was only going to serve 1 year. So I decided, well, if he's only going to serve 1 year, I'm the vice mayor, I can run for council, and so I did. And I got elected to two terms. We were term limited then to 8 years. So I was elected to 2 terms as mayor. And then after that, I sort of fell into the job as clerk of courts for 2 terms. When I found out the incumbent wasn't going to run, she said, why don't you run? So I said, well, I guess I will.
So when you were clerk of courts, what years was that?
2000 to 2008, approximately. They were 6-year terms, so it was longer than that. 2 6-year terms, it's 12 years.
So there was a gap between being mayor and being the clerk of court?
Yes, about a year,
Just a year? Okay.
just a year.
So when you came to the city of Kettering in 1967, what was the city administration and the city council like? What was it like in Kettering?
Well, I wanted to talk to you about that. It was a lot different than it is today. We had no city building. Our city government was in a former wooden school building on Dorothy Lane. And the law department was in a rented upper story house next door. That was the city building. Well, there was no court. The court was over in Moraine. And so the city council met in the court, which is over in a wooden building in Moraine. And we met there for about 2 years, I believe, until we decided to build the city building. And that took 2 years to build. So my first experience with the council was in this wooden building over in Moraine for about a year, probably.
That's still there?
I'm not sure if it is or not. It's still there. It was taken, one of the buildings was taken over by the Kettering Moraine Museum for a number of years. That was the clerk of court's office then. So things have improved a lot, and it took about 2 years to build the city building. Had to start over once because the upper beams didn't fit the first time. Had to be taken down and fit back up. So it took 2 years to build instead of 1 year. But everybody was pleased to get that city building built, I'll tell you that, compared to what we had before.
So that building is somewhat unique. How did you come to that design? How did that design happen?
Well, I can't say that I had much to do with the design. We had an architect doing that, and he had presented a couple of possibilities, and that was the one that looked like the best. So I can't say that I had much to do with that choice.
So in the early 70s, you moved into the new government center.
Yes.
What was the next big project that you really remember changing Kettering in the 70s?
Well, we were going through a tremendous change at that time. When we first got into the city building, I remember, Oak Creek was not there. So we had to develop all of Oak Creek and a couple other areas to begin with. You know, like maybe half of Kettering was not there. So we ran into a lot of rezoning requests and so forth, to the point that we had not only had to meet once every 2 weeks, but council had to meet every week. In fact, we met sometimes on Thursday night also, twice a week, because we had so many rezoning cases and things to do with development of Oak Creek and the new areas. So it was a much different situation than you have now, where maybe you struggle to fill up once every 2 weeks. But I didn't know any different at the time. But it was rather trying for the first year at least, until we got things going. There were actually 4 developers that developed Oak Creek, so we had to deal with all of them. And there were a lot of requests for rezoning around the east end of Kettering, and they take a lot of time. And sometimes we have a full house full of people there on one side or other of a rezoning case. And sometimes they got pretty hot under the collar, I'll say that about it. So it was a different situation than you have now at City Council. And as I had even when I was in my 8 years, things were a lot smoother, I'd say, and a lot easier to do, actually. It was tough trying to pick one side or the other in a lot of those difficult cases, but it had to be done. And I think we did the right thing most of the time.
Well, that's a great point that you think now in hindsight,
Yeah.
what you did back in the 60s and 70s was the right thing to do.
I think it was. And Oak Creek turned out to be a wonderful development. It still is.
Yeah.
If you drive through, it still is. It's just as good as it was to begin with. And some of the other areas are that way too.
When you started back in that time with all that development, were there annexations that had to occur, or had they already happened?
I think the annexations were already done. I can't remember much about an annexation. So I think that was pretty much settled down by then. Yes. But it was, in those early years, it was an all different type of a council meeting than I had while I was mayor and what you're used to.
It was a little less formal and more about getting the work done.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we were listening to what the people had to say a lot. Both sides weren't bashful about letting us know how they felt about certain problems, rezoning and so forth.
So in 1967, when you came on council, were there still some dirt roads in Kettering?
Well, I can't remember any dirt roads, but there were some undeveloped roads, of course, and that just didn't exist. But I can't remember any dirt roads. I'll tell you one road coming into Kettering, I think it was Bigger Road, coming into Kettering, had holes in it that were that big around. And Irv Welch, the city manager then, shut them off. But he said he didn't have the money to fix them. And they weren't drivable, so he just shut the road down, and you had to go around Smithville Road. When I bought my house, that was the case. I couldn't move from where we lived in the East End to Kettering because that road was full of holes. I had to run down to Smithville and then come back on Dorothy Lane. But that was the state of Kettering in those days. Irv just said he didn't have the money to fix the holes, and he didn't.
And that's a great segue to my next question. What was it like to work with Kettering's first city manager, Gerald Busch?
It was good. I didn't particularly have any problems with him and his abilities. He was at it a long time, and I think he was at it too long. But he was at it, I think, 25 years, something like that. But members of council decided it was time for a change, and so they made a change. And then we had 3 younger city managers who were usually only here for a short period of time, like 3-4 years at a time, who were all good, by the way. All 3 of them that I can think of were very good as city managers. They all went on to theoretically bigger things, but I'm not sure that worked out that way for them.
I would disagree. I don't think there is a bigger or better thing. But
Well,
that's my personal opinion.
I don't either. I don't either. And I think that they might have had dreams that were a little too high. But all 3 of them were good city managers, I thought.
So when you were mayor, which city managers did you hire as the mayor?
Oh, gosh. I don't remember exactly. I think probably all 3 of them. Might have been during there was John Laney, Phil Hockey, and Bob Walker, those 3, and I think probably I had some part in all 3 of those. So I don't know if that was while I was mayor or not. I don't recall it. I remember hiring the police chief when I was mayor, and that was a good move. One of the best moves we ever made, because to put it bluntly, we were having a lot of problems with the previous police administration. But once the new chief came on board, our problems ended with the police department. But before that, there was a constant struggle.
Well, you're doing a very good job of weaving in the things that didn't go quite right into the things that went very well.
Well,
And that's
sometimes
good for this
you
interview.
sometimes you remember the things that didn't go right more so than the others, but it shouldn't be that way. But
How about your role in the development of this area, Lincoln Park Civic Commons, the Phrase Pavilion?
well, I had a pretty good part in. I'm living in One Lincoln Park now, and that was during my term on council that we approved that. In fact, there was some controversy about a second wing that was supposed to be built on that. The neighbors contended that there shouldn't be a second wing built on One Lincoln Park. But I was able to research my files and come up with the fact that during the first public hearing, it was understood that there would be a second wing. So that took care of that pretty well. So fortunately it did, because I'm living in one wing, I think.
How about the Phrase Pavilion? What was that like coming to the conclusion? Because that started towards the end of your...
Yes, it did. We started trying to raise money about a year ahead, Pete Horan and I, and we talked to some of the big shots downtown who we went to first seeking to get a start on funds. And they recommended that we don't do anything for a year. And they said Mrs. Kettering is trying to raise money for the theater. What's the name of the theater? I can't remember off the top of my head, on Main Street. And it wouldn't be well to compete with her raising funds for that. So we put everything on hold for a year. And by that time, then I was finished as mayor, but I continued to work on fundraising. Pete and I did most of the fundraising for the Phrase. Our goal was to reach $1.5 million, and then we could go ahead with it. And fortunately, Pete raised about half of that, and I raised about half of that, so we were in position to go ahead. That was the main thing. But I was finished as mayor then, but I continued to work on fundraising. And I'll never forget talking to Mrs. Kettering. She came out here to the city building, had a driver, came out here to talk to me. So I talked to her in the mayor's office about making the initial contribution to the Phrase. And she was not real thrilled with it. But I talked to her for almost an hour, and I convinced her that it was going to be a good thing for the whole community, not just Kettering, but the community as a whole. And after that hour, she came through with an initial offering that was pretty darn big. And that was the start of raising funds for Phrase Pavilion. And we didn't think we could do it without her. And it was a struggle, but she did come through and see our way. And Pete then was working on Mrs. Phrase on the other side. And he got a big donation out of her through her son. And that was the other half that we needed. And we filled in with some others from General Motors and a few others, probably half a dozen others, to where we got to the point where we had enough money to start it, which was our objective. And then we did raise money later on too, but put an awful lot of city money into it also. The city manager was not too keen on that. At one point, he wanted to stop it altogether. I don't know if you knew that.
I did know that.
You did know that. And we worked on council and everything to convince them that that wasn't the way to go, and continued trying to raise money, which we did get enough to go ahead with it. And of course the city has put a lot of money into it afterwards too, but it was the right decision. And I think it worked out well for everybody. We didn't have enough restrooms, of course. And we had to bring,
yes, that's true.
We had to bring in a portable restroom for about the first year or so, until we added on to the restrooms. But That was a minor, we overlooked that, but that showed up pretty quick. But all in all, the phrase has been a good thing. I don't think it has cost the city an exorbitant amount of money every year if they do have to put in some money. But the last couple of years have been pretty tough because of the virus situation. But it'll come back. It'll come back.
So with the Phrase Pavilion in Lincoln Park, tough decisions were made. 30 years later, you're happy with those decisions and what happened?
Yes.
Anything 30 years later you wish you hadn't have done?
Well, I don't know. I've never really thought about that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that there's anything that I think was a big mistake. I've never thought much about that, but I can't think off the top of my head of anything that I felt that way about. We had battles on council, just like any other council does, over certain things, but we tried to bring a united front when we made a decision. So that was a good thing. That was one thing council always tried to do. And but I think all in all, we made the right decisions.
Mr. Busch?
Yes.
Can you remember a council meeting that lasted forever because the community came forward to either
Because
fight for
what?
something? A council meeting where the community came forward to fight for something, or like I remember regional dispatch during my time here. The council chambers were packed with people. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember that. I remember having meetings that went till 12 o'clock, though. It was a full house. I don't remember that particular one, sorry to say.
Do you remember what the meetings that lasted the longest were about?
Mostly rezoning cases. Maybe we'd have 2 and 3 rezoning cases in one night, where we'd have the first reading and second reading 2 weeks later. But we had nights where we'd have 3, maybe even 4 rezoning cases in one night. Whereas now I think that rezoning cases are pretty rare. But the rezoning cases usually brought out the people, for good or for bad, you never know. But all in all, I was pleased with the time that I spent on council. I was never sorry for a minute that I did it and spent the time doing it. Although I had my full-time job, but I worked at the University of Dayton for 40 years, as you well know. And then ran for clerk of courts after my 40 years weren't up, but that was sort of a goal for me. And I might have retired anyway. I don't know. I didn't have that decision to make. I left UD on Friday night and started at the court on Monday morning. I remember that.
Took a nice long vacation.
Yeah, I did.
Saturday and Sunday.
I did. So, but both places worked out well for me. Being mayor was enjoyable in most cases. I think I did about 30 weddings. I tried not to do a whole lot of weddings, but you have to do them for your friends and neighbors. You can't turn them down. But strangers, I tried to send to Miamisburg or Vandalia because those people like to do weddings.
Well, I appreciate you putting into context that you did all this work as mayor. At the same time, you had a 40-year career at the University of Dayton.
I had a full-time job at UD, yes.
Now, this next question may not seem appropriate for the interview, but do you want to just tell everybody who's watching who your favorite employee at the University of Dayton was?
Who my favorite employee at the University of Dayton?
Yeah, make sure you get this right, because that guy had the same last name as me. So make sure you get it right.
Yes. Well, I think that's be appropriate. I'd say so. He ran the print shop. I had a lot of business with the print shop.
So for our listening viewers, he's talking about my father.
Yes.
Could he explain that a little?
Yes.
He didn't say, I figured.
I knew him long before I knew you.
So can you just tell the story that, it is a small world, that you hired, my father worked for you, and then I came on board of the city towards the end as your term as mayor?
Well, yes, he did work for me for a while, although I wasn't responsible for the print shop. He did work for me for a time, and then the print shop was broken off into something bigger. It got bigger and bigger, so it had to be separated out. But then I did see you a few times and working at Central Receiving and so forth. Was glad to have you.
Well, it is a small world.
It is, yeah.
Go to your offices at UD, and the next thing I know, I'm coming to the city of Kettering.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
So when you left the city as mayor, let's just think of it in terms of as mayor. Is there one thing you would say was so much different when you left than when you arrived? What would be that one thing? What
was different with the city? Well, we had a lot of things that were different. Some of the things I wanted to mention, one of the things was our Sister City program. We had no Sister City program. Well, it was started before I was mayor, but it was something we didn't have in my initial years on city council. There was no Sister City program. There was no volunteer program in the early days. So we got both of those started, and that was important. The Sister City program led to three visits to Steyr, Austria that I'm aware of. I went on 3 visits to Steyr, and one to our other sister city of Kettering, England. And the first visit to Steyr, there were only 10 of us that went. We went on a bicycle trip to Austria, Chuck Horn and I. He called me one night and said, "Jerry, I'd like you to go on a bicycle trip with me." I said, "What do you mean a bicycle trip?" "To ride bicycles in Austria." I said, "Well, I'm not that much of a bicycle rider, although I did have a bike and I did ride." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, the whole deal is sponsored by the airline, and it's going to cost you $400 for the airline, the hotel, and everything for 2 weeks." So I said, "Well, I can't pass that up." So I went on that bicycle. I got my bike out and rode it for 3 weeks every day so I could keep up with everybody else, which I did. But we were joined by a group from New York also, so it wasn't only Kettering. But then the 10 of us from Kettering, we made a trip to Steyr, Austria, which had become our sister city, but nobody had ever visited it before. So we rented a bus. We were staying in Graz, which was about 60 miles north. So we rented a bus and went one day to Steyr to see what it was like. So we got there about 11 o'clock in the morning. They knew we were coming. They invited us. And we were a little early getting there, but they were having a lunch for us, and they had speakers and that sort of thing. So they did some entertainment of us in the afternoon, and we were there till almost dark, and then we took the bus back up to Graz. So that was our first sister city visit ever. It was only 10 people. And if I remember, maybe 2 of them didn't go, maybe there was only 8. But then I went back on 2 other sister city trips. The big one was the second trip, where we had 80 people that went. We had 2 bus loads when we got over there, 40 people on each bus, the orange bus and the green bus. And Chuck Horn at the last minute decided he was not going to go, that he couldn't go I guess maybe it was because of his law practice, but he decided that he couldn't go. So that left me as the #1 guy since I was the vice mayor. So I had to give the speeches and so forth, which was okay, but didn't bother me that much. But and I got to stay at the mayor's house for three nights and chauffeured around by the mayor, Franz Weiss, a great guy, and his wife. And they took us for 3 days around the city and around the whole region, which was wonderful. And the rest of the people were all staying with other folks and some at the hotel and so forth. But that was a big excursion to have 80 people. And then there was a third trip later on that I went on also. There was a smaller trip, but was very good, very well done also. So I made 3 trips to Steyr and 1 to Kettering, England. The one to Kettering, England was okay, but it wasn't the same type of trip that Steyr puts forth for us. Although I was glad to see London and all the things around there. But Kettering had 2 competing sister city programs, which didn't work out too well. In fact, the last I heard, they've dropped their sister city program altogether. So I guess we no longer have a second sister city, but that's okay. Steyr makes up for all of it. For our kids growing every other year and those kids coming over here every year. My 2 grandsons went over at one time. My first grandson met his wife on the trip over there. As Gary will tell you. So that worked out quite well. But
well, I know you have a couple sheets of paper there. Are there some things on there we haven't asked you that you
well,
want to talk
one I had on here was about our volunteer program. We had basically no volunteer program for quite a while I was on city council. And there had been talk of it, but no action. But so finally, council asked the city manager to start thinking about a sister city program. And well, let's see, how did we get into that? I don't know that I remember. But
was Joyce Connor was our first volunteer administrator. Maybe that was-
yeah, were you talking about volunteers?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're all right.
Yeah, she worked for me at UD. She had a part-time, half-time job, and in accounts payable, which was kind of below her. And I got promoted down to the main building as purchasing director, and so she worked for our research accounting office. But there had been talk about starting a volunteer program, and the city manager was charged with that responsibility. And so I knew that Joyce was in accounts payable. She was capable of much more. And so I called her up and asked her if she wanted to go down, apply, call the city manager, make an appointment, go down and talk about that job that hadn't been advertised yet. So she said, well, I don't know, but I said, yes, you should, you will. And so she went down and talked to him and was hired right on the spot as a part-time manager for the volunteer program. Now, when she started, there were 0 volunteers. When she left, years later, there were 600 volunteers. So to say that she did an outstanding job is beyond question. As was the fact that she was named the #1 volunteer coordinator in the entire country at their meeting in Florida. And then she was named one of the top 10 women in the Miami Valley. So she wasn't too bad. But I had an inkling of that because when I hired her for this part-time accounts payable job, I had interviewed 6 women part-time. And I narrowed it down to 3. And our personnel manager said, well, send them down to the guidance center and have them take some tests. Well, you can't do that anymore, but we could do it then. So we sent the 3 likely prospects down to the guidance center for tests, which was an intelligence test and battery of other. And so our personnel man came over to me the next day and he says, you really ought to look at this person. I said, why? He said, well, she pegged the meter on intelligence test. I said, I'll hire her. So I never told Joyce Connor this. I never told her that. I guess I'm telling it to her now.
I guess you're telling her right now, that's right.
But what our city man, or what our personnel man said, if she's in a room with a lot of people, she's the smartest one in the room. And it doesn't matter who's in there. So I never told her that. But I guess I'm telling her that now.
And she did a great job for our volunteers.
She did a great job for the program. Naturally, they named her number 1 in the country. So that was our volunteer program. That was different. Well, there was a lot of development remaining in the city when I got on council. We had Oak Creek to develop, and we had a lot of areas that were just raw countryside. You might say they were part of Kettering, but they were completely undeveloped. And that was a big job, not only for the city staff, but for the council to work their way through all those rezoning requests and things of that nature that I discussed before. So those were some of the major things that we talked about. I had a note, we're talking about STIRE and Sister City program. I don't know, people didn't seem to know that STIRE was the city where the World War II ended in Europe. There were 60,000 German soldiers that surrendered there, and they were taken over by the American troops and the Russian troops. And the next day, the armistice was signed in Europe, in Steyr, Austria. Now, not many people are aware of that, but that's our sister city. So those are the things that come to mind that I remember. Do you have any other questions for me?
I don't have any other questions. Anybody else?
What in your heart made you want to run for council in 1967?
Because I knew how to do it. It dawned on me that I've been helping my brother-in-law with his state senate campaigns, and I knew how to do all this stuff. I knew how to put up signs, to knock on doors, to get literature printed and distributed and so forth. And the opportunity just seemed to be there. Well, I'll take a chance and do it. Not that I thought I could win, but I thought, you know, I got a pretty good chance. And that was what caused it. I wasn't talked into it by anybody at all. I don't that I remember.
How long did you live in Kettering before you ran for council?
We moved to Kettering in November of '67. And no, wrong. I got on council in November of '67. And we moved to Kettering in December of '56. So for that length of time before I got on council. But there were 6 years that I worked with my brother-in-law's campaign and so forth. But
Maybe just kind of what some of the outline of Kettering was in '67. What were the boundaries that are kind of familiar?
Well, the boundaries were somewhat like they were. Oak Creek was not developed, but I think the boundary was there. It was all grass. The boundaries, I think, were there. I don't know how they got there or when, but the boundaries seemed to be there. And then we just had to rezone certain areas of it and so forth, and improve the streets and all that sort of thing. And there was a lot of effort that went into Oak Creek. But Oak Creek is, in my opinion, a wonderful area, and turned out, and it still is, as well as some of the other areas. The area that I first lived in was on Delaney Street. That was, I believe that was 200 houses or so, and that was a good-sized flat too, when we moved into it in 1956. So there were a few others, and over north of Dorothy Lane, there was some development over there, that flat. So on the east side of Kettering, there was a lot of development. There wasn't so much on the west side. The west side was initially more developed than the east side was. But there was some over there. The golf course remained over there, where I managed to play for 60 years. That was important.
That was important.
Important that stayed there. I wrote a letter once to the city when they were having a discussion among themselves that the golf course was costing them too much money or so. I wrote a letter when I was mayor to the city council offering to take over the course. And I told them we would run it, management, in the proper manner, and we would give them half the profits, and we would pay for any losses. An offer they couldn't refuse. But they wrote me back a letter saying, in effect, mind your own business. But I thought it was worth a try anyway. But
If you don't ask, you'll never know.
But they did make improvements in it later. Maybe I prodded them into it, I don't know. But and I managed to, as I say, I managed to play there 60 years, as well as belong to Sugar Valley Country Club. But I played a lot of golf at night and on every Saturday and 1 or 2 nights a week. So no vouch for that. I never could interest either one of my boys into playing golf. I tried. The younger one played some baseball, but he was a track star at Fairmont East. Tell you how good a track star he was in cross country. They had the East Invitational there every year in cross country, where they had 40 boys. No, they had 20 teams running. Each team runs 7 boys. So you had 140 boys running in a straight line, starting to run cross country for 2 miles. And my son Keith finished first out of 140 boys, so he was a pretty decent runner. But he didn't want to run in college. He said they want you to run summer and fall and winter all year round, so they give you a scholarship. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to study, so he did. Became a dentist. And my first son became an optometrist. So we had the eyes and the teeth covered for 20 years.
That's not bad.
20 or 30
that's good
years.
parenting right there.
Yes, it was. Now they're both retired.
Mr. Busch, I don't think we have any more questions for you.
Well, I hope I've...
It was an honor to be able to sit here with you today.
Well, it's an honor to have you there. Knowing you as long as I have and seeing how successful you've been, we don't want you to ever leave. Promise me that.
All right, I'll take that advice.
And I was really shocked by your health problem.
Yeah.
I was really hurt by that too, but thank God.
I'm doing better now.
Thank God it worked out. And you stay here as long as you possibly can.
Well, like I said, I believe this is the bigger and the better.
The city needs you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Well,
Commissioner.
thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it's nice talking to all of you.
Mr. Busch, we have Shana McConville over here.
Oh, or,
She wants to.
Oh, hi,
speak with
Shana.
you for 1 minute.
I didn't see you come in.
I felt like I was so loud and so.
Very stealthy.
I have this award for you. The
This-
Public Art Committee really wanted to thank you so much for everything you've done, including
Well, thank
making the
you.
arts happen in Kettering.
Well,
It's
thank
really,
you.
It's your fault.
I meant to get into that tonight. That was another one on my list, but we sort of ran out of time.
Yeah.
But the arts program was one of the things that were dear to my heart. Of course, I served on the committee 20 years.
Go ahead and tell us about the 1% for the arts.
Oh,
We'll add that to the interview.
1% for the arts. Well, I was mayor at the time, and I was on the arts committee for the League of Cities, and they were promoting this 1% for the arts. So when I got back from a national meeting, I approached City Council on the idea. In fact, I wrote a letter to the City Council asking them to consider this 1% for the arts. And they turned me down. So Connie Campbell was active in that. She was one that prodded me into doing it. And I said, well, Connie, we'll just wait them out till there's a change and we'll go at it again. So we did, and when Mary Lou Smith became mayor, she got it through for us. So we got the 1% for the arts going through. And it's been a good thing. We've done a lot of things throughout the city, and I hope we're doing more. Capped off with what we did on the 2 bridges recently, the iron that's on those. But it's better than putting a wire fence across them like they do most bridges. I think we did the right thing with that, and I think it turned out pretty darn well. On the Arts Committee, I've been among a bunch of artists, and I'm not an artist in any way, so I tried to stay not in the limelight on that and just listen to what went on. But I was pleased with most of the projects that we did over 20 years, and didn't always understand them all, but they seemed to work out all right. You have to admit that. So it's a good program, and I hope it continues. There's plenty more work to do for art in public places, and it's got a good committee and a lot of good people in there, so I hope it continues to.
Yeah, you did 26 years on that committee.
Was it that long? Gee.
I think you probably could have done a couple more years, Jerry.
Well, I could have.
We've got more projects.
Well, no, it was time for me to hang it up there. And unfortunately, my health has not been very good lately, so I hope to do better. But right now, I'm having some problems. So it was time for me to get off of that committee anyway. But
Go back and we'll get a picture of you
Oh,
getting the award.
okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't get
I disrupted the whole process.
Here, this thing actually does pick up fingerprints pretty easily, so we'll,
Can you kneel down a little bit?
I shall do as directed.
well, thank you for this. I appreciate.
One more, Mr.
One more
Busch.
minute,
Oh.
Bishop. There you go. All right.
Okay, I wasn't expecting anything like this.
Well, if you don't have a copy of the council meeting, Connie gave some remarks.
Yeah, you know, I meant to watch that, but I got to watching the football game. And
Wait, what?
and I meant to turn it over when the time came, and I forgot. I did turn it over, but that part was over.
Yeah.
So I said, darn.
She spoke for a while, actually. I think
I-
Mark
I-
and council were getting a little tired of hearing how great you are.
I missed that. I missed all of, I'll have to see a rerun of that somewhere.
Yeah,
along the way.
yeah. I'll get you a copy.
But
I
I
have a printout of her.
I fully
remarks,
intended to
too.
watch that, but it just slipped my mind, and by the time I turned it over, it was too late. I watched
understandable.
I
It's
watched the rest of the council meeting.
Oh,
however.
good. Yeah, in all its glory
Yeah,
after
that's
a
right.
football game. So.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything.
Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks
Yeah.
for serving on the Arts Committee and being the chief.
Whew, do what I can.
Okay,
All right.
well, thanks, people, I appreciate it.
Okay.